All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for showing up with us today. We are going to get into a topic that is probably not everyone's favorite, but here we are to talk to you about Brown Act and some of the recent legislation that's come out, excuse me, and really how it's going to affect your student governments, your academic senates, whatever it is. So my name is Stephen Kadur. I'm the community organizer for the SSCCC. Great to see a lot of familiar faces on here. I also have with me Cheryl, so I'll let Cheryl introduce herself.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Cheryl Aschenbeck. I'm Vice President of the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges, and I'm a faculty member at Lassen College.
Awesome. So Cheryl and I are going to go through this presentation. Please, if you have any questions, you can either drop them in the chat or just wait kind of till the end. We'll have a little question and answer time at the end. But we really want to just get into nitty gritty of the Brown Act, how we are going to transition now that the state of emergency is probably going to be going away soon and all of that. So I'm going to kick it off to Cheryl to start us off.
Great. Next slide, please. So as we get started, I think it's important to note that neither Stephen or I are lawyers. And so this isn't legal advice, although we certainly have sought a little bit of input, but as lawyers work, they never tell you absolutely. And so these are not absolute. These are our interpretations along with other student senate folks and academic senate folks, and really looking at how are we interpreting it? How are we going to implement this? Next slide, please. To begin with, I think it's important to note kind of why the Brown Act exists and the reality that as student organizations for your local student bodies, for me and my faculty colleagues as representatives on our local academic senates, we are doing the public's work. We are considered a public organization, and we'll look a little bit more at that. But these these government codes or pieces of code exist to aid in the conduct of the people's business, that piece in bold on the slide. And it's really because we're doing the people's business, it's important that our actions be open and that our deliberations, our discussions, our decisions are all conducted openly. We are beholden to the public while we do the public's work. Next slide, please. And so a favorite part of Government Code 54950 is that the people of the state do not yield their sovereignty. So, in having agencies that represent us, you in being a legislative body who represents students, the students, the public is not yielding their sovereignty to you, that really they're giving you authority, but they still have a right to participate in what you are deliberating, discussing, and deciding on. And so, we don't yield our sovereignty. We insist as the citizens on remaining informed, and we have that right. And that's what the Brown Act really provides for us as public citizens, is the right to remain informed and involved with our local governments or legislative bodies. Next slide, please.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. So really, Government Code 54950 applies to legislative bodies and all the sections after that are considered Brown Act. So legislative bodies are any local body that are created by a state or a federal statute. Not only is it the local body itself, but it's any committee that they have created through formal action. And that's the decision-making body itself. So the advisory committees, however, that have a less than quorum are not considered your legislative body. So if you form an ad hoc committee, anything along those lines, those, if they have less than a quorum, do not become a legislative body. However, your student government is a legislative body. If you have a standing committee that practices the same subject matter, has the same continuing subject matter, maybe it's an events committee or a finance committee, any of those sort of standing committees that have a fixed meeting schedule that they were created maybe in your bylaws or whatever it is, those are now legislative bodies also and are thus bound by Brown Act. So if you think about it, what about the SSCCC? Well, SSCCC was created through Title V, Section 50002. And it really says the Board of Governors recognizes the SSCCC as a representative of community college associated student organizations before the Board of Governors and the Chancellor's Office. Therefore, the SSCCC, all of its standing committees, its regions are all therefore legislative bodies. That's our statewide legislative affairs committee, our regional affairs committee, our regions themselves, Region 7, Region 5, all of those different regions that are out there are all bound by Brown Act because they are legislative bodies. So when we get into the Brown Act requirement, all of those would apply to the students that are the voting members in those areas. The ad hocs, the task forces, those work groups, those are not legislative bodies. They do not apply because they end up consisting of less than a quorum of members. So what about your SBAs, your student body associations? Well, your district, your board of trustees, they actually establish your student body association. If you look on your board website, you will see an administrative regulation and a board policy that applies to your student government. It actually, through that, it actually creates it. It says that a governing board of community college can authorize the students of a college to organize a student body association. If you exist as the representative voice, it is because years ago, the Board of Trustees took action to establish you, and then now you have a board policy and an administrative regulation that applies to you. And the same goes with academic senates. Cheryl, you want to chime in? Oh, you're muted.
As Stephen said, academic senates apply as well. We at some point in our history locally were created by the action of our local boards. Government code allows for that. Actions were taken, and as you know, new generations come through like me and the folks after me, before me, as we work with our academic senates like you, there was a formal action taken somewhere in our history to make us exist. And so we have to comply with Brown Act as well. And that also goes, like you, for any of our standing committees. And so for many of our campuses, the curriculum committee is a subcommittee or a standing committee of our academic senates. And many of you may have that chance to serve on curriculum committees, know that they're supposed to be complying with the Brown Act as well. There's an occasion, depending on how curriculum committees were set up, or other committees really, but curriculum committees also created through an action, I think, in Title V. So we're beholden to it.
So let's go into the Brown Act key requirements. These are the things that we've been practicing for years, right? Before COVID, this is what all of our organizations were bound by. So I'll go through some of them, and then Cheryl, I'll kick it back over to you to go through the rest. But we've always heard the 72 hours in advance, right? Agendas must be posted 72 hours in advance to your meeting. That is not 3 days. That is 3 full business or 3 full days, 3 full 24-hour periods. So you need to make sure that your agenda is posted. All of the member locations need to be on the agenda and posted in that 72-hour window, or in advance of that 72-hour window. So that means any member of the student government, if they are not accessing that meeting from the physical location, they need to put where that physical location is that they are going to be accessing the meeting from. And when they do that, that then becomes a public location for anybody to access. And we'll get into what that really means a little bit later. On your agenda, the time and the location of the meeting needs to be there. It needs to be posted in a location that is freely accessible to the members of the public, and on your website if you have one. So what that means is, years back, we actually at Reedley College, when we were doing our student government meetings, we were posting our agenda on the door to our student government room. Come to find out, that's not okay, because the physical student center would close, right? And the doors become locked. Now the public no longer has access to that agenda that's posted there. So we had to put a cork board outside of the student center just to put our agendas on, so the student has 24/7 access to it. Also, if your college has a website and you have a page on that website as the student government, you now are bound to put on your agenda onto that website. So you would need to work with the college to make sure your agenda goes up 72 hours in advance, just to comply with Brown Act. Cheryl, let me kick it over to you for the rest of them.
Sure. Some of these seem, kind of like, wow, really? But again, going back to the comments in government code that we're doing the work of the public. And so they have every right to know when we're meeting, where we're meeting, to have access to those meetings, to know what we're talking about, because they may want to weigh in on something through public comment. And so all of these provisions are really intended to allow that to happen, that citizens, members of the public can know where we are and participate. It seems a little troublesome when you think about agendas have to be posted at each of those sites that are listed. So, the reality is, as a faculty member, if I can't be to campus for a meeting I'm supposed to be a part of, I can, before 72 hours, tell the chair of my Senate that, hey, I can't be there. I'm going to meet at my local community library instead. Well, then it has to be listed on the agenda so everybody knows. It needs to be posted at that public library as well. Unfortunately, public libraries actually work pretty well because they have posting boards outside. They often host community meetings. If I were to do it at my home, like I'd have to have something outside my home posted. I have to be willing to let people inside my home. I'd have to also make sure that my home is ADA compliant for any members of the public that were to attend. So, obviously that becomes a little bit intrusive and problematic. And so really challenges. But when we keep thinking, the other part is we've got to have that agenda. Not all the attachments necessarily have to be out 72 hours in advance, but enough of a brief description with each agenda item that a member of the public knows what's going to be discussed and can choose to join us and weigh in or listen or just disregard. With those items, also making clear that those items that are listed as action items, those are listed specifically as discussion. That's communicating to the public that if it's a discussion item, there isn't a plan for action. And so you really need to adhere to that, even if there's, oh, we really wanted that to be an action, like it really should go to the next meeting to be acted upon, discussed now, because that's what the agenda says, acted upon later. Also really important that we report any actions taken. That becomes part of our minutes, as well as it is a requirement that we record the vote of each member present. And we'll talk a little bit about what that can look like. Also, as uncomfortable it can sometimes be, there are no secret ballots. Our public work has to remain public. Secret is the opposite of that. And so we can't do secret ballots, do something behind the scenes in order, hey, I've got to vote on which student should be receiving a scholarship with my local academic senate. Well, we want it to be a surprise, but we can't keep that in private unless we have a task force or somebody handling it, and then we just make the recommendation. There's ways to work with it. But in a meeting, I can't say, hey, write down the student you want, and we'll collect those and decide who wins. Like that has to be public if we're making an action there.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, Cheryl, I've seen at a couple of student government meetings where there's an agenda item to appoint somebody into a position, or there's elections of some sort. And the student government said, hey, these are our friends. We don't want them to really, we don't want to hurt their feelings. Well, guess what? You are you're in a public position, and this the public can hold you accountable for the position that you take, and that's just one of the ways that it happens. And I know with some student governments out there, hey, it might suck, but you really have to do it. Also, at some of these, at all of the locations that you have, I know Cheryl was mentioning it, you have to have the agenda posted and all of these things. The technology that you were using to access that meeting has to also be available for any member of the public that were to show up. So that way, if they need to make public comment, they can use, say, your laptop. If that's the way you're accessing the meeting, well, now they can use a laptop. If you're using a satellite campus and it's like a Zoom capable room, whatever way that you are addressing the body needs to be the way that the public gets to address it also.
Great points.
Yeah. So let's go into special meetings. Special meetings have a little bit different requirements. You still need to post your agenda, location of the meeting. However, agenda the posting requirements is not 72 hours. It's 24 hours. It still needs to be posted, location that's freely accessible. All member locations need to be on it. However, special meetings should not be used because you forgot to post your agenda on time. All right, that is not the way that works out. Special meetings are, hey, something came up and we need to deal with this before our next regularly scheduled meeting, right? That action needs to be taken because, it's time sensitive, whatever that is. That's a special meeting. It's not, oh man, I missed the 72 hours. Let me just post it 24 hours in advance and call it a special meeting. That's not how Brown Act works. So it's really for the special circumstances. It's not the clerical or the posting errors. We also have emergency meetings. Prior to COVID, in my time, I had not really seen that many emergency meetings. It's in a very limited case basis. It's for those work stoppages, that crippling activity, severe impairment of public health and or safety. Like I said, COVID was the first time that I really saw that. And when it comes to emergency meetings, all of those Brown Act requirements are still there, except for you do not need to give the public that 24-hour or 72-hour notice. You need to hurry up and hold a meeting. If there are members of the public, maybe a news organization, anything like that, your student government or your student campus newspaper that request an agenda, then you need to still send them the agenda. So any of those members of the public or organizations that say, hey, anytime you're holding a meeting, we would like an agenda, you still have to send it out. So if you have a listserv or something along those lines, you still need to send it out. It's not, hey, this is a kind of a closed meeting. It's just an emergency. We're just doing it. Any of those avenues, streams that you use, you still need to send it out through that way. But you could still have that emergency meeting without having to go through the 24-hour or the 72-hour posting requirements. And then there's closed sessions. Brown Act also talks about closed sessions. You are allowed to hold a closed session for topics that are employment, evaluation, discipline, dismissal of a public employee, or pending litigation. Your student governments will probably never have to hold this closed session ever, and they shouldn't be holding a closed session. You do not have employees. Advisors are not employees of the student government. They are employed by the district or by the college themselves. So there wouldn't be that evaluation of them. Pending litigation, if there is any lawsuit that comes against the student government, it would go against the school and not you yourself, and that would get taken up at the Board of Trustees level. Our board of directors for the SSCCC, we use this to evaluate our executive director or any lawsuits that would come up. When are violations of Brown Act, there could be public records requests. You would have to comply with those public records requests. And that's all part of the that issue. But Cheryl, do you want to chime in at all? Do you see this in the academic senate world?
Yeah, absolutely. We get asked this one a lot in academic senates. Can we hold closed sessions? And the answer, like Stephen just said for you, is really no, not really. Really rare exceptions. I think the only thing I've seen of these is related to employment, and that's the evaluation of somebody's minimum quals for equivalency. And it's been, even that's a little bit gray, but can fit in under employment because they're applying for employment and a determination needs to be made. But besides that, the Senate shouldn't be seeing these things either, academic senates. And so like you, really rare that we should see closed sessions. Here's those public deliberations. So remember, business of the public must be done in public. And so the legislative body, we've noticed we have agendas, people know where to go, how to contact. We've got to make sure that we as members of a board, you as members of a board or student body organization, only conduct your business related to that organization when you're in the meetings of that. So it can be tempting and often very easy to start having conversations with faculty. We often talk about having faculty hallway conversations like, hey, I've got members of my Senate here. Let's talk about this thing that's on our agenda. We really can't do that. We've got to, I might be able to have a conversation with one person, but if I start reaching out to more folks, then it starts to become a daisy chain where, ultimately more folks get to know what's going on. We need to be having those conversations in public at our meeting. I think, Stephen, you had a couple more examples.
Yeah, so I've always been asked, what about non-quorum meetings, right? You didn't reach quorum, you still want to have a meeting. Is that okay? You start to tread a fine line on the Brown Act violations because, hey, technically discussion items can still be discussed, right? We can still have a conversation. But anytime you talk about things that are going to be in the future is where you are getting into that Brown Act violation. Like Cheryl said, the whole daisy chain, if you think about it, when you were in kindergarten and you made those little paper chains, that's the same way that the conversation happens. You have a conversation with one other individual. There's nothing stopping that individual from having another conversation with someone else and another conversation until you reach a quorum of your members. Boom, you just violated the Brown Act. Same thing with that, they call the other one the spoken wheel, where you're in the middle and you can have a conversation with several different people about the same thing. And hey, maybe it wasn't all together in one spot. Well, guess what? You just connected yourself into a conversation, and that is now a Brown Act violation. Student governments have asked in the past, hey, is it okay to have maybe a Discord or, another group chat sort of, platform? And the answer technically is sure, right? Because yes, you can have that. You can have some sort of conversation mechanism to be able to talk, but we kind of err on the side of caution and say, hey, you probably shouldn't be doing it, because once someone throws something in the chat about something actionable or something that will eventually be on the agenda, now we've just violated Brown Act because that conversation just got out to the membership of our student organization. So the question had also been brought up, well, if we can't have like public discussions, well, what happens when we go on a group trip? What happens if we wanted to attend the fair together or go to a social outing? Is that okay? And yes, you can congregate. It's the topics of the discussion that you really don't want to get into. Make sure you're steering away from anything that is going to be actionable in the future, anything that you would put on your agenda and take action on. So just don't discuss those items that are within subject matter. It's just for socialized talking, right? And Cheryl, I don't know if you want to chime in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that social part. You likely are going to have classes with some of the other folks on your SBA boards, and have all the conversation. You don't have to avoid anybody in public, but you do need to watch, as Stephen said, anything that could end up on an agenda really is not something to be talked about, just generally in general conversation. Kind of hold that until you can deliberate publicly.
So do you ever wonder why legislative bodies largely meet in person?
I do.
Yeah. It's really because it is so hard to meet all of the teleconferencing requirements. And it's actually getting more strict, I feel like, as more legislation is being introduced. So teleconferencing requires a few things. The first thing is that all votes have to be done by roll call. That can be somewhat of an issue, especially with some of our student governments that have a larger amount of students, having to roll call every vote, the agenda, right? Approval of the agenda, approval of the minutes. We go through all of our business items, and we would have to do roll call votes for all of those. We have spoken with some legal counsel and have kind of found a workaround. One of the ways that you might be able to do that is when you ask for any objections, if you can use the phrase, hey, by not objecting, you are in agreement, or by not objecting, you are voting yes. That is an understood, everyone's voting yes. This is a unanimous decision. So when it goes into the minutes, it is reflected that way, as everyone that is present for this meeting is voting yes.
I think, Stephen,
yeah.
Oh, sorry to interrupt, but with that, it's really important that you have a record of who's attending that meeting by teleconference as well as in person, if that's an option, because you wouldn't want votes attributed to folks who actually weren't in attendance, but you do want to be able to capture after that statement and presumably no objections that those who were in attendance participating in the meeting had voted yes.
Yes, love that. Yeah. And then the next one would be your agendas are posted at all teleconference locations. We stated that already, right? So all of the locations that are on the agenda, those are the only physical places that a member can access the meeting and still be present for that meeting towards quorum. So if I stated that my local library was going to be an access point, well, I just made that accessible to the public. So that needs to be a teleconference location, no matter if I show up there or not. So by putting that out there, this is now an accessible teleconference location. It still needs to be a teleconference location for the public. So you need to make sure that all locations are going to abide by that. If you take that away from the public, you just took away their access point. That meeting does not happen because you just took away one of the forms of the way for the public to access that meeting. So make sure that students or your members are going to be there to be able to bring that meeting to the public.
That's a great reminder, Stephen. So if I do say that I'm going to, notify my chair that I'm going to meet at my local public library, and that goes on the agenda. If a friend later says, hey, sure, I can swing by, pick you up, and I'll take you to campus because I'm going to go to the same meeting. Like, I can't say yes. I'm obligated now to being that contact person who, facilitates the teleconferencing from that site that I notified I was going to be at. So as much as I might want to grab that ride and head to campus for the meeting, I have an obligation now to stay and teleconference along with any members of the public that might show up. And I don't know about you, in my experience, like it's rare, at least for faculty to, or general public to show up in these places where we might be teleconferencing from, but we have that legal obligation to continue to teleconference from there once we notice it.
Yeah, that's great. You want to take the rest of the slide, Cheryl?
Sure. I mean, we've already said we have to make sure that those sites are available to the public. That's why posting your home address, first of all, feels really intrusive and not private. And then to think about having to invite folks into your home really doesn't work for most of us, because yeah, it might be your friends, but it could be anybody else from the public as well. And then we've got to make sure, as Stephen had said on an earlier slide, that members of the public may address the body, and so that public comment. And again, if I'm accessing via my phone, then that needs to be the way that the public is able to access, or that they dial in directly and can access, but that needs to be an option for them at that location. So there's quite a bit that goes into teleconferencing, and this was even before COVID, it was a challenge. And as technology's improved, yeah, it's a little bit better, but not necessarily any easier to really make sure you're complying with Brown Act. So I think it was 2 years ago, AB 361, Assemblymember Rivas proposed and later had passed a bill that suspended some of the teleconference restrictions. When we first entered into COVID, the governor's executive order suspended some elements. Rivas attempted to further extend some of the things that were sunsetting from the governor's initial executive orders. And so it allowed some teleconferencing, lessened a few of the restrictions. Votes still had to be by roll call. That's an element of Brown Act no matter what, but more important when we're on teleconferencing. If there's a disruption with teleconferencing, we can't take action. So if the public can't, connect via teleconferencing or see what's going on, and that's if teleconferencing is intended by Zoom, video and phone, and let's say the video crashes, but we still have phone, like that's still not enough. If it was intended to be video and audio, it has to remain both. And so we can't take actions as a body if there's any disruption to that, because again, the public wouldn't have access in the way that they'd intended, and we told them that they would. It requires under 361, every 30 days, our bodies have to take a new action to consider, is there a risk to meeting in person? Is it a health and safety to have the option of teleconferencing? And that has to become a formal action of our body every 30 days. This is allowed through January 1st, 2024 under a state of emergency, and that's the challenge. The governor's state of emergency, which we'll point out on another slide, but I'll tip you off now, ends next week as it relates to COVID. Rivas's bill doesn't specifically say that it has to be under a state of emergency related to COVID. So there could be other states of emergency that you might be able to use 361, but it has to be a governor's state of emergency. And he has a website. They maintain a website of the governor's state of emergencies. And it might be that, your county has flooding and an extended emergency, or fire, or we certainly have seen our share of natural disasters. Some of those may become a state of emergency you can use for this. But you still, as a body, have to keep taking those actions every 30 days to continue to allow teleconferencing.
Yeah, and I love that point that you made, Cheryl. It is only the governor's state of emergency. I had a student government reach out the other day. Well, what if we just say there's a state of emergency? Like we just said, hey, it's, emergency conditions, we just can't meet in person. That's not okay. Like Cheryl said, we are public bodies, need to be open and available to the public. And because that governor's order for the state of emergency for COVID is ending on the 28th, that means everything goes back to teleconferencing locations have to be put on the agenda. That's the biggest thing. So if you want to think, right now, Rubio had a bill that was introduced and passed that went into effect at the beginning of this year, January 1st of 2023. It was Assembly Bill 2449. It allows you to teleconference without giving up your location. But they said, you know what? If you're going to do that, we are going to make sure that there are even more requirements for you. So one of the things is your first thing is a quorum of your members have to be at one same location. So that means a quorum of your members have to be in the same physical location to be able to teleconference in and not give up your location. All right. That's the caveat every time, not giving up your location. If you teleconference and you give up the location, you're good. All right. But if you do not want to give up your location, these things have to happen. Quorum in the same place. It has to be for either an emergency or a non-emergency situation. And we'll get into those on the next two slides, what constitutes an emergency and a non-emergency situation. You're limited to using that quote unquote excuse or that the emergency or non-emergency clause. You're limited to using that for an individual to 3 months or 20% of your regular meetings. You have to have both your video and your sound on. There still needs to be a process for ADA compliance at that physical location that you have. all votes still need to be by roll call. The teleconferencing disruption precludes you to take any action. And then for the individuals that are teleconferencing and not giving up their location, they must disclose all people that are 18 or over in that location specifically. So if I am at my house, and there are other people that are over the age of 18 here, if I am not giving up my location and teleconferencing in, I would have to name them and their relationship to me before that meeting starts. And that bill, Assembly Bill 2449, is in effect until 2026. So you can use this, but it is so much more difficult if you do not want to give up your location. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Yeah. And to Stephen's point, for me, when I first read this, the part that was like, what was the having to disclose people over 18, and that it had to be both video and sound. And, thinking more about it again, going back to we're doing the public's work, our work needs to be public. This is also a little bit of a protection, or at least a disclosure of any potential influence on the votes we are taking or the discussion we're having. And so, the rest of the body, the public, as well as the members of the board or the organization, need to know who might be exerting influence on me that's not on camera, or maybe on camera, or is nearby and can be giving me the looks, or wielding a club or a pillow ready to hit me. I don't know, but so it makes some sense the more I thought about it. But at first it was kind of like, that's an interesting addition. The challenge, and I'll say our faculty are talking about this one too, because for our academic senates, we still have faculty who are either hesitant or still really at risk to come to campus because of worries about COVID or public safety, or have existing health conditions and really just can't do it yet. This sounds like it could work for them because they don't have to disclose their location, but the key is they can't do it for the entire year. They can't attend every meeting remotely. It limits the fact that it has to be no more than 3 months of meetings or 20% of regular meetings, whichever I think is least, if I remember right. And so, it kind of, and then the other piece is, there's two provisions: emergency, which is kind of like family illness, or, something happens, I just can't get there. But then non-emergency, I actually have to make a statement. And I think we have that on the next slide that tells the body why I won't be there, and they have to take action to start the meeting. And that's assuming there's a quorum in person to start the meeting, because as a president, a Senate president, a student body president, or a committee chair, I start thinking like, gosh, if everybody decides that they're going to submit these for the same meeting, I may be sitting in a room by myself with no quorum, which means we can't meet. So there's got to be some advanced coordination of who's going to be in person, who might not be in person, who's going to teleconference. So yeah, as Stephen said, this one really seems to get complicated. I think the original intent was to help carry some of Revis's provisions from 361 out a little bit further. But then enough concern obviously approached more likely related to things like our city councils and county boards of supervisors, other government organizations that really absolutely, I would say even more than us, need to be doing public business publicly. But it impacts us as student bodies and as academic senates.
Yeah, so 2449, when can I teleconference and not give up my location? As Cheryl was saying, it's under two different caveats, or two different quote unquote excuses. The first is an emergency situation, an emergency circumstance. That is a physical or a family medical emergency. It says that your legislative body or your student government is going to request what that description of your circumstances is. You do not have to give up your medical, personal, information, anything like that, but you still need to say, hey, I'm going to be missing this meeting because of a medical or a physical emergency.
Yeah.
And it still gets put onto the agenda, and they would still have to take that action to approve you being gone from that meeting and not giving up your location. This is only if you want a teleconference and not give up your location. So you could take the next one.
Yeah, and I think another piece of that is important to note that we looked further into it as we talked about preparing academic senates for 2449. And well, what if we don't have it on the agenda? It might be a good idea to have a placeholder at the start of every meeting to take action on any 2449 emergency requests. Otherwise, there is an allowance in the language of the code that kind of says, even if it's not on the agenda, the action can be added and taken at the start of the meeting. Like, it's that important that it be disclosed and that the body decide. So just a heads up on that one. So emergency conditions, Stephen told you a little bit about. The other is just cause, and these certainly seem reasonable. Caregiving, whether child or other person, contagious illness, hello, we're still dealing with COVID and flu and other things. Physical or mental disability that isn't otherwise accommodated, and as Stephen said, doesn't have to be actually disclosed. If you're traveling on business related to that body, so if you're attending GA later this spring, or the leadership development in the fall, that may be a reason to teleconference, and in this case could be considered just cause. This one has tighter restrictions. You can actually only use just cause twice in a calendar year. So it has to be really deliberate. Emergency conditions is the one that has, up to 3 months or no more than 20% of meetings.
Yeah, so if you think about the Brown Act eras, right now we are in an era that has the traditional Brown Act requirements, but they're also the AB 361. You can teleconference without giving up your location as long as you take that action every 30 days to say, hey, we are going to remain, teleconferencing because, it's a health or safety concern. And we also have AB 2449. Hey, you can teleconference, not give up your location as long as there's a quorum in one specific location. You have your video, your sound on, all of those different restrictions. At the beginning of next year, January 1, 2024, it is only going to be Brown Act and 2449. No matter what, 361 is going away. So we're not going to be able to, teleconference if we take that action every 30 days. And then 2026, so far, it's only traditional Brown Act, unless more legislation comes. So you want to make sure that, we are advocating. I've talked to a lot of advisors and student leaders. We are already seeing a decline in, student engagement. And, teleconferencing allowed us to engage with more students, right? We were able to have students participate in student government meetings if they were not around. If they couldn't make it to campus because of transportation, a transportation need, or, they had jobs and things like that. So the SSCCC has been advocating on your behalf. We do want to let you know that we are going to need your help moving forward advocating. We were able to find an assembly member who is going to introduce a bill for us this year that will give us an exemption, an exemption to the teleconferencing restrictions for student-run organizations. That's huge, being able to get that onto the floor, but we're going to need the power of our student governments, advocating to their legislators to say, hey, this is a huge need. We have students that are minors. What if they can't make it to a campus? Are they now going to have to put their home location because that's the only way that they can access their meeting? So we're going to be, advocating and pushing this hard over the next couple months, and really trying to see that this come to fruition. So we're going to need the power of our student governments behind us, because that end of the state of emergency is ending next week. So all of these restrictions are going to come in, and they might hit us hard. So we want to make sure that we're prepared and really moving forward. So if you want to know what that assembly bill is, that assembly bill is going to be 1275. It's being introduced by one of the Central Valley legislators, Joaquin Arambula. But yeah, really, if we can leave you with anything, Brown Act is going to, start hitting your organization because of the teleconferencing restrictions. We want to make sure that you're compliant, because we do not want you to have to deal with, CPRA requests, any of those kind of things. They're not fun to deal with. We'll be here as a resource for you. I'll check in the chat to make sure if there's any questions, but Cheryl, if you want to, leave them with anything, we have our email addresses. Please feel free to contact us. We're here as a resource, but we'll also field some questions right after this.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, and appreciate the chance to talk Brown Act with all of you. And no, you're not alone in your challenges with complying with Brown Act. The faculty have to handle it and deal with it as well on not just our academic senates, but our other standing committees. There's always that wrestle of thought, like, does this need to be Brown Act compliant or not? And I think the one thing we didn't talk about is what happens if we violate Brown Act. Like, it's always hey, don't violate Brown Act. There's a lot of debate that we're not going to get hauled off anywhere, but it could, at the very least, require that we backtrack any actions that were taken, You know, even more than that, it could, you know, undermine our public's trust in us for, you know, apparent for not being totally transparent and compliant with Brown Act. And so, and, you know, really there could be legal ramifications down the road at the Student Senate, at officers. And so, you know, we really, in good faith, need to conduct the public's business publicly. And I'll keep going back to that statement because I think it's an important reminder. And I know the times when I was trying to get an agenda finished and posted more than 72 hours, often like 73 hours before a meeting was going to be held, it seemed like a huge hassle, but it was really important that folks had that opportunity. And even again, it can be like, it's no big deal, nobody ever comes. Or we'll just round up folks. Like it's about inviting folks in despite the teleconferencing challenges. Also keep in mind that teleconferencing really applies to your members. You can always have teleconferencing available for the public to weigh in, and how you do that is up for you to decide. It's not as restricted in the ways that we talked about with 361 or 2449. That's specifically how your members interact and have limitations through teleconferencing, but the public always, if you open up teleconferencing, the public has that opportunity from wherever they would like to connect teleconferencing. They don't have to have an actual address. So thank you, Stephen. We had some requests in the chat to share the slides. I'm assuming you're going to do that.
Yeah, so slides will be sent out when the recording is going to be made available. We're going to go in and check the CC, the closed captioning, to make sure it's compliant. It'll go up on our YouTube, but I'll also send it out to all the members here. But yeah, thanks for attending today. We'll open it up for any questions right now. If you do have questions, I want to just thank Cheryl for being here with us today, being able to deliver this presentation with us. As I said, you know, we really want to engage our students. We want to make sure that, you know, we're having these compliant meetings and having, you know, the public's, you know, trust in us. So anything that we can do at the SSCCC to be a resource for you, please reach out. That's what we're here for. So thank you so much.